Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Dore, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back. Today's episode is sparkling, but funnily enough, we're actually starting with wines before they sparkle. So I'm fresh off an incredible trip to Champagne where I got to do something very few people outside of the wine world get to experience. Taste the still base wines known as vin clair. Yep, they are the raw, unbubbling beginnings of Champagne, and I'm going to tell you all about what that's like, plus share my time tasting these vin clairs at two iconic houses, Perrier-Jouët, and yes, you do pronounce the T on the Jouët, I found out, and Maison Mumm. But first, let's talk about how easy it is to get there from London. I hopped on the Eurostar to Paris, and once you arrive at Gare du Nord, you literally just cross the road. It's 5 minutes or so to Gare de l'Est, and boom, you are then onto a direct train to Reims. And by the way, Reims is not pronounced how it's spelt, which is R-E-I-M-S. Think Reims, but with a bit of a nasal French twist. How très chic. So, if you're wanting to compare Reims with Épernay or Reims is the bigger city, grand Gothic cathedral, more hotels, restaurants, and a lot of the major champagne houses have cellars there. So if you're after some energy, that is where you want to stay. Épernay, it's a bit more intimate. It's home to the famous Avenue de Champagne. And well, it's tiny, it's historic, it's full of growers and prestige, and it's totally charming. Now, I was lucky enough to stay at the stunning L'Oasis Hotel in Mouteny, just outside of Épernay, close to Aix. Think boutique luxury in the vines, but more on that later. But trust me, you'll want to bookmark it. And driving through the Montagne de Reims region, it was a real reminder how the vines are all pruned and they were just planted in almost exactly the same way. So incredibly neat and low to the ground. And that's because Champagne is actually the only wine region in the world with such strict rules on pruning, all part of the AOC regulations that were put in place back in 1938. Now, for those of you that want to know about these pruning methods, there are 4 of them that are officially used, and it just depends on the grape variety and the characteristics of the vineyard. So the ones that I saw were trained in the Cordon de Royat system. So Pinot Noir is king in the Montagne de Reims region, and most often it is how Pinot Noir is pruned. So it uses one permanent horizontal arm. This is called the cordon, and it has short spurs, and the vine is trained quite low to the ground. And then this method is there to limit the yields, and it helps create more concentrated, structured wines. However, if you were going through the Côte de Blanc region, you would see a lot of the Chablis pruning system, as this is mainly used for Chardonnay. The low stump has usually 4 canes or cordons that create this fan shape. And this method is great in cooler areas because it lets in air and sun and it helps the grapes ripen evenly. You may also see in certain places single or double Guyot, which is used for both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And it's a system where you train 1 or 2 long canes along the wire. And it's just really flexible and it helps manage how much fruit the vine produces. And the last pruning system is called Vallée de la Marne and is specifically designed for Meunier, hence the name, which it's named after the region in which the biggest concentration of Meunier can be found. So what's intriguing is that they take both canes and they train them in the same direction along the wire. So this is apparently helping control Meunier's naturally vigorous growth, and it suits the landscape in that part of Champagne. But All of these systems were designed to balance quality, ripeness, and consistency, and they're part of the reason Champagne's vineyard practices, along with its cellars and historic villages, was awarded UNESCO World Heritage status in 2015. So, if you're ever in a Champagne vineyard, ask them to take you through their pruning method, as it's fascinating and rather confusing, but very much part of the Champagne that we end up drinking. Now, seeing as this trip was all about vin clair, those still base wines before the magic of the bubbles, I thought I'd take us back in time with a little Champagne history because, spoiler alert, Champagne didn't used to be fizzy at all. I do love the deliciously accidental history of Champagne. So vines have been grown in what we now call the Champagne region since Roman times, and by the Middle Ages, Champagne's still wines were already famous across Europe. But the real sparkle didn't start until the 1600s, when winemakers realised that cold winters stopped fermentation in its tracks, only for it to restart again in spring, which resulted in bubbles and a lot of popped corks. And, well, sometimes even exploding bottles. So much so, they nicknamed it Le Vin de Diable, the devil's wine. So let's talk about the most legendary monk in history, Dom Perignon. Legend says that in 1693 he took one sip of this sparkling accident and shouted, "Come quickly, I am tasting the stars." And well, I really want that to be true, but most historians believe he actually spent most of his time trying to get rid of the bubbles. Still, he did create some of the techniques that define Champagne today, like using black grapes, hello Pinot Noir, and cork closures to keep the sparkle in the bottle. Meanwhile, across the channel, an Englishman called Christopher Moret had already written a paper in 1662 explaining how to make sparkling wine by adding sugar for a second fermentation. And the English also had stronger glass bottles at the time, so ours didn't explode. So whilst the French finessed the style, we should still be giving a gentle round of applause to the Brits for getting the sparkle started. But what turned Champagne from a faulty fizz into the drink of kings? Well, it got royal approved. By the 1700s, French kings were pouring champagne at court like it was going out of fashion, and the first champagne houses, Ruinart, Moet, Veuve Clicquot, began popping up to meet the royal demand, and the rest, as they say, is history. So now let's talk about these vins clairs at Perrier-Jouët and Mumm, and why these quiet little base wines are actually the heart and soul of every bottle of champagne that you and I have ever loved. So vin clair literally means clear wine in French. These are the individual non-sparkling wines made from the first fermentation before blending, bottling, and the magical second fermentation that gives champagne its sparkle. Winemakers taste through dozens, sometimes hundreds of these vin clairs every year to decide the final blend, the assemblage. And this step is absolutely crucial to the style and the consistency of each house. Now, tasting vin clair is a very different experience from tasting finished champagne. These are high acid, bone dry, unoaked or very lightly oaked, and they are full of information. They are data. For a beginner, they might taste quite sharp, even harsh, but to a trained palate, vin clair reveals the wine structure, its aromatic potential, the acid backbone, and its aging capacity. So they're the raw material of champagne, and it's fascinating. It's like tasting them. It's as if you're looking at a sketch before the painting is complete, if that kind of makes sense. When you taste a Chardonnay vin clair, expect something lean and tightly coiled. Citrus, green apple, chalky minerality, and sometimes a hint of florals or some saline edge. It's bright, it's linear, it gives lift and elegance to the blend. In contrast, a Pinot Noir Vin Clair tends to be broader and more structured, with riper apple, red berry hints, a touch of spice, and more palate weight. It brings body and texture and that backbone. Some producers will also work with Meunier, which can add soft fruit, roundness and charm, though that's a whole other conversation. So Vin Clair really is fascinating to taste. It gives you this behind the scenes look at how champagne is built from the ground up. And what's amazing about trying the wines of Perrier-Jouët and Mumm on the same day, which incidentally both are owned by Pernod Ricard, is that you really get to understand their styles better. As Chardonnay is the key variety of Perrier-Jouët, it is their backbone, whereas Pinot Noir is the essence of Maison Mumm. I was genuinely surprised and very impressed to learn that both of these champagne houses have set themselves incredibly ambitious goals when it comes to sustainability. In fact, they are aiming to have 100% of their vineyards under regenerative farming by 2030. You all know how much I love talking about regenerative viticulture, but if for some reason you have missed some of my other episodes about this subject, regenerative viticulture is basically a much more holistic approach to grape growing, and it focuses on improving soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem resilience to create this more sustainable and climate resistant vineyard. So we really, really want as many wineries to get on board and be focused in this way. But for now, let me introduce you to these two remarkable maisons. Let's start with Perrier-Jouët. It almost makes perfect sense that they're so deeply committed to regenerative practices. After all, this house was founded in 1811 by botanists. A reverence for nature is quite clearly baked into their DNA. And over their 200 plus years of history, they've only had 8 cellar masters. And their current chef de cave, Séverine Fresson, is the very first woman to hold the role. She took over in 2018 and has already made some fascinating evolutions in the style of the wines. One of the more subtle yet impactful changes she's made is to the liqueur de tirage. That's the mixture of wine, sugar and yeast added to create the second fermentation in bottle. She's adjusted it to bring out more florality in the final champagne, which really leans into Perrier-Jouët's signature style, which is florality, texture and delicacy. Perrier-Jouët was also one of the first houses to really champion Chardonnay, which remains the backbone of their identity today. Interestingly, they don't really rely heavily on reserve wines in their non-vintage expressions. Only about 15%, 20% max, which is quite low compared to many others. It means the base wines they select each year have to be incredibly expressive. Their official sustainability program began in 2016, and by 2021 they started implementing regenerative practices in selected plots. Out of their 66 hectares, 22 are already under regenerative viticulture, and they are not stopping there, thank goodness. The goal is 100% by 2030, as you know, but they're also going beyond their own vineyards. They're working closely with their grower partners, helping them understand the long-term value and benefits of regenerative practices. When we tasted through their Vin Clair, the most fascinating set for me was the 3 experimental wines from their regenerative trials. We started with a control wine from a plot with no cover crops. Then we moved on to one where floral cover crops had been planted. These were delivering twice the nitrogen. Finally, we tasted a wine from a plot planted with biomass cover crops like legumes, rye, sainfoin and pulses. This one had 3 times the nitrogen of the control. Just to quickly explain, diverse cover crops, they can serve multiple functions. They fix nitrogen in the soil naturally, reducing the need for synthetic inputs. They also help structure the soil, retain moisture, and boost microbial life. And the difference in the wines, genuinely eye-opening. As we moved through the 3, the wines became more intense and structured, with aromatics that grew prettier and more delicate, and with the final one showing more citrus, freshness and depth. Now, keep in mind, we tasted 9 Vin Clairs, and yet Severin will be blending from a selection of between 500 and 600 base wines. Among them were stunning Chardonnays from Perrier-Jouët, Le Mesnil-sur-Oger and Cremant, all Grand Crus in the Côte de Blanc. One particularly eye-opening comparison was tasting the same Vin Clairs aged in 2 different vessels, one in stainless steel and the other aged for 6 months in foudres. Perrier-Jouët uses a blend of steel, barrels and foudres in their final blends. The wine aged in steel was fine-boned and slightly flintier, while the foudre aged sample had this beautiful silkiness, a touch of cinnamon bark and around a fleshier texture. The contrast was subtle, but really impactful. And to top it all off, one of the most special moments of the visit was walking across the road from the winery to the Maison Belle Époque, their historic chateau. We tasted the Belle Époque Blanc de Blanc 2014, the Brut 2016, and the Rosé 2014, each paired with a dedicated menu designed around the wines. The settings are unforgettable. The chateau is surrounded by gorgeous gardens, many of which are inspired by Art Nouveau, echoing the Maison's deep connection to nature and art. And the best part is that this is something you can actually experience yourself. Perrier-Jouët hosts private tastings and meals at Maison Belle Époque. It feels so intimate and just unbelievably beautiful. So over at Maison Mumm, I had the chance to meet the current chef de cave, Yann Mounier. And I have to say, his last name made me smile. It's almost spelt the same way as Mounier. It's like he was destined to work with champagne. But Yann isn't like a new talent. He's deeply rooted in the region, the 3rd generation of a family of winemaker and growers, and his family has worked with Mumm for generations. So whilst he's only officially been at Mumm for about a year, he's been working in Champagne for the last 20 years, and he knows this house inside and out. Mumm was established in 1827, and as you already know, Pinot Noir is their soul. As early as 1840, they acquired their first vineyards in Versenay, long before the classification system of Grand Cru and Premier Cru ever existed. So these plots were chosen simply by taste, which is kind of amazing. But today, Mumm has house vineyards in Bouzet, Versay, Aï, Ambonnay, Mailly Champagne, all iconic names, and especially Versenay, which really remains the jewel in their crown. If you look at a map, you'll see that all of these sit within the Montagne de Reims, a region known for Pinot Noir. Mumm owns a total of 218 hectares, with 160 of them being Grand Cru, one of the largest holdings in Champagne, I believe, and 78% are planted to Pinot Noir. But let's not forget their Chardonnay, sourced from some of the top Grand Cru villages of Avis, Jouy and Cremant. Now, one fact that I learned, Mumm was actually the first champagne house to place pressing centres right in the vineyards, which is a big deal because pressing the grapes quickly is key to preserving quality and freshness. And in terms of sustainability, Mumm has been quietly doing a lot behind the scenes. They received HVE Level 3 certification in 2016. So that's France's highest environmental certification for agriculture. And and also earned their sustainable viticulture in Champagne certification that same year. And by 2020, they'd already reached zero herbicide use. And alongside Perrier-Jouët, they've laid out a clear ambition to have 100% regenerative viticulture by 2030. So tasting through their Pinot Noir vin clairs was such a contrast to the Chardonnays we'd just tasted at Perrier-Jouët. With Mumm's Pinots, my notes were full of peach, musky, orange blossom, violets, berries, structure, and this gorgeous fleshiness. It's Pinot with muscle, but elegance too. Whereas the Chardonnays from Perrier-Jouët were all about lemon zest, chalk. I was writing notes of flint, white blossom, jasmine, white peach, and bright pear. Light, lifted, and ethereal. It was such a brilliant side-by-side showing of two different houses, styles, and philosophies, yet both with a real serious commitment to sustainability and the future of champagne, which I love. It was great to taste the 2024 base wine for their, I guess it's their flagship champagne, the Cordon Rouge Brut non-vintage. This is the one with the instantly recognizable red sash on the label, which was inspired by the French Legion of Honor. This wine is, of course, a Pinot Noir-led blend, so typically about 75 to 80% with Chardonnay and a touch of Meunier. So you can taste their signature style, bold, fresh, and structured. And they blend 199 base wines to make this wine. And it was really full, but fruity, with loads of stone fruit, violet, and then this chalky nature coming through. They had already added the 30% reserve wine to this blend, but time will tell, as this is a wine that needs to age in the bottle on the lees after the second fermentation for a minimum of 20 months. So we won't be tasting the final result for several more years. However, what you can taste and should taste right now if you can is their RSRV Blanc de Noir 2014. So their RSRV collection, it's a hidden gem. It's their prestige line. It's crafted from Grand Cru sites. And as Mumm is all about Pinot Noir, you definitely want to try their Blanc de Noir from Verzenay. So as you already know, this is their spiritual home and the Grand Cru central to their identity. So just this weekend, I toasted with this very champagne. It is structured and rich and gastronomic with blueberry notes. It's yeasty with this vanilla pastry and then this earthy truffle and violets. It's delicious. And to quickly finish off, I said I would mention the hotel I stayed in case you want a recommendation so you can start planning your trip. So if you are planning a trip to Paris anytime soon, do not forget just how easy it is to hop over to Champagne. It's only about an hour by train and well worth adding an overnight stay to soak in the vineyards, the cellars, and a little luxury. Next week, we're heading south to explore the wines of Lisbon, a total food and wine lovers paradise. We'll be diving into Portugal's smallest wine region, Carcavelos, making some of its most stunning fortified wines, then talking about the historic Colares region, making wines from pre-phylloxera Ramisco vines planted in sandy soils by the Atlantic Ocean. Expect to learn some new native grapes of Portugal and a lot of delicious storytelling. But before we wrap up, as always, a wine quote to leave you feeling inspired. The American author Mark Twain famously said, "Too much of anything is bad, but too much champagne is just right." I feel it's the same for these podcasts. So if you agree and are getting value out of these episodes, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, a star rating on Spotify, and share it with your wine-loving friends. Screenshot and tag me on socials. I love seeing where you're listening from and what you're sipping. Wishing you a positive, productive, and joyfully fizzy week ahead. May it sparkle like a freshly popped bottle of champagne. Until next Monday, wine friends, cheers to you.